one of the things I really like about the Core Web Vitals is there's a lot of technicalities involved and things like that, and can be quite difficult. But I think at a higher level, it's trying to measure the user experience in a way that can be meaningfully understood by most users of the internet.
Hello, and welcome to the Frictionless Experience, the podcast where we lay waste to digital friction. I'm Chuck Moxley.
And I'm Nick Palladino.
And I'm very excited about the guest joining us in the Frictionless studio for this episode. Barry Pollard, Web Performance Developer Advocate at Google, joins us today to talk about all things Core Web Vitals. Now, if you spend any time in the world of building, managing, or driving traffic to websites, you've likely heard of Barry. Barry is a web performance developer advocate for the Chrome team at Google, working on Core Web Vitals and Chrome User Experience Report, or CRUX. He is one of the maintainers of the HTTP archive, and he's also the author of HTTP2 in Action from Manning Publication. Barry speaks often at worldwide events, including as a speaker at Google I/O, and he contributes often to Google's web.dev site. Barry, welcome to the Frictionless Experience.
Thank you very much. That was a bit of a mouthful, so well done for getting through it there.
It was a lot of words to fit in, but I think I made it.
Yeah, Chuck definitely likes to do it a lot.
HTTP is always a fun one to try and say whenever you're trying not to concentrate on it.
See, I always try to say it so fast that it just comes out HTTP2, and you're just like try to blur it really fast.
And I'm like, HTTP. Now, the topic of Core Web Vitals might seem like a technical or engineering topic, but we have talked often about how it's really a topic that every team involved in creating digital experiences should care about. So if you're a digital product manager or a marketer or a head of e-commerce, keep listening, because I promise I will do my best to keep the conversation out of the weeds and more universal for all of our listeners. Barry, let's start by talking about your role at Google. Help us understand your role and your mission and what you and your team are focused on.
Sure. So I've been at Google for just over 2 years now. So I joined after the Core Web Vitals program was initiated. So I was an outsider looking in for a while, trying to figure out what all this was myself. Wrote a couple of articles, a few blog posts. I was quite active in the community, and eventually got the call up and joined Google themselves to see what was going on the inside. And my role as a developer advocate is primarily to help developers. So I see myself as a liaison between the outside developer team and the inside engineering team, who are busy coding away and coming up with all these 3-letter acronyms and fancy metrics and Core Web Vitals. And we just need to help explain what our thinking is and why we're coming up with these to the wider world. So I do a lot of writing, as you mentioned, on web.dev, trying to explain these metrics and why we're coming up with them and what the best way is to improve them. I do conference talks. I come along to podcasts like this when I'm invited, and try and get the message out, and also take messages back. So if we hear a lot of people are confused about X, Y, or Z, then we'll bring it back to engineering and say, hey, this isn't it's confusing to people. Is there any way we can simplify it? Is there any tooling changes we can do? So I also work with a lot of the tooling teams here, so Chrome Dev Tools, the Lighthouse team, the CRUX team, and that sort of thing. So we try and, as best, make it easy and possible for both Google tools, but also tools that are also used by third parties to do it. CRUX in particular there's a lot of tools built upon that that allow other people to grab the information we got and display it in different ways and try and make understanding easier for everyone.
I think what I like about that role especially is that you're bringing the practical side of the numbers, because that's one of the things about especially Core Web Vitals, but really the long message of these Google recommendations that have come through, even back to TTI when it was first introduced. The goal is truly to create a better frictionless experience, very true to our podcast and what we stand for. But it's very obscure at a developer level. When you're sitting down and just trying to say, okay, well, Google's now requiring that we have to do this specific number. Yet when you really kind of, boil it down and get down to the crux of it, pun completely intended. when you boil it down and get down to the crux of it, it's really helping your users and helping you figure out how to create a better digital experience for your users. And I really like where the Core Web Vitals went, especially when going from FID to INP. I think that was a very profound change that allowed us to really understand that interactivity in a way that's otherwise unmatched. And I think that's been a really big thing. But I like seeing your role in all of this because you're bringing that practical side to the Core Web Vitals, especially for product organizations.
Yeah, I quite like it as well because there's a lot of areas in Google where they can't be as transparent as we are. Search is an area that will always be clouded in mystery, and every time someone says something, the whole SEO community jumps up and down and goes crazy. So they have to be careful with what they say, whereas I get to be a little bit more free with what I say because our aim is not to try and cloud anything there, but to be as honest as possible and upfront with what we're trying to achieve here. We're not trying to show any tricks here. We're just trying to, as you say, make the web a better place to say, a better place to visit and hunt around. And I think to your point earlier, Chuck, one of the things I really like about the Core Web Vitals is there's a lot of technicalities involved and things like that, and it can be quite difficult. But I think at a higher level, it's trying to measure the user experience in a way that can be meaningfully understood by most users of the internet. So there was a lot of hugely complicated metrics that really depend on how browsers load and fetch things over to HTTP thing and how that works and when the DOM's loaded and all these crazy acronyms that only real geeks like myself fully understand. Whereas the Core Web Vitals, yes, it's got 3-letter acronyms. Yes, some of those are quite difficult to really understand exactly what it's doing. But at a high level, I've always said I can explain to my dad what's going on here. So there's 3 metrics. LCP, largest contentful paint, is you click on a link, how long does it take until the main content is loaded there? My dad can get that. He can't understand how it's calculated or how browsers work, but he gets that concept of I click on the link, 1, 2, oh, there it's there. CLS. Again, the calculation of it is quite complicated and difficult to understand, but how annoying is the website with stuff moving around all the time unexpectedly, i.e. when you're not clicking things, you're trying to read something, an ad pops in, everything shifts down, or you're about to click on a button and it moves to the side and you click on the wrong button. Again, my dad, not the most technical person in the world, gets that. Doesn't get the formula, doesn't get the exact thing, but he gets lots of moving around is bad and I don't like it, and it's good that we have a measure for that. And finally, FID or IMP, that I'm sure we'll talk about later, is how long from when you click on something just until something happens, because we've all been there when we're clicking and nothing happens, and you click again, and nothing happens, and you click again, and suddenly 3 things happen at once, or it adds 10 things to your cart or whatever. And again, that's a frustrating experience. So there's lots of geeky people involved in this, and I'll include myself in that. But at a high level, we're just trying to make the web a nicer place for everyone that's using it, whether you're a developer or a user or Barry's dad. And I think that's a really powerful part of the program. And what we're trying to do, we're not trying to be nasty Google with a stick there saying you have to program your website this way or that way. We're just saying, hey, we'll measure it. We'll tell you whether by these definitions, if you're doing good or bad. And it's up to you whether you want to decide to fix that and hopefully give a better experience to your users, and they're hopefully get more users because of that.
I'll say, just from my personal experience on the web, you really can see the influence. Just from one website to the next, you can see the influence making a difference in traversing multiple experiences. And, you know, in the past, obviously you still hit some websites where all of a sudden it's like, wow, what are these guys doing? But in the past, you would see a very inconsistent measure. And I use the word measure, I guess, a little bit inaccurately there, but an inconsistent measure from one journey into the next journey. And you could just be going from Amazon to a news blog to a small blog. And as you're kind of navigating all those things, you see a more consistency now that you didn't see before. And it's because, in my view, I think Google has created a culture that makes everyone care. And it's not just, oh, my engineers focus on that. Google's created a culture that allows everyone to see, oh, this does matter. And it isn't just performance, and it ties these teams together, because now you're not just saying, hey, engineering, the certain metric is bad because it came up in a report that one executive ended up having. But now you're saying, hey, I get this. I get why it matters. And it matters to my customers, and it matters to my bottom line as well. And it matters to create a more consistent experience. And you're seeing that influence over the course of the web now. And just from my experience, and maybe that's because I do this day in and day out, and I'm constantly looking at these kind of figures, and so I'm more aware of it. But I really think our listeners are probably tuning in right now, listening to this little monologue and saying, you know what, you're right. You do see a more consistent experience from one website to the next nowadays, and I really think it's because of what you guys are doing.
I'm not entirely convinced that we've got that consistency, certainly not as much as we'd like yet. But I think that the other powerful thing about the program is it allows us to easily measure different websites, because every website's different. And we get this a lot, saying, hey, I'm a really complicated app rather than a website. My users are all on great super fast connections and with high-speed PCs. They're okay downloading all this because we give them this great experience with this interactivity. We've now got the metrics to sit there and go, well, no, that's not actually the case. We can see a lot of your users are slow, and a lot of users are doing that. Maybe they're okay waiting 7-8 seconds for your website to load, but just because it loads, it works on my machine. It's a famous thing that all us developers have said at some point in our lives. We've actually can do that. And then the other really powerful thing is you can sit there and type in a competitor's website and say, hey, they're better than us and they're doing the same thing, or selling the same widgets or whatever, offering the same service. How come they're better than us? Which, as you say, does get interest outside the development team from execs, from marketing teams, from SEO teams who are much better at selling this than we are. As developers, we're terrible about actually promoting the good reasons for this. So it's good to have some other people getting our back here and actually making the case for us, because I honestly do believe that there is good business performance benefits here. Like the SEO side gets a lot of the newspaper headlines of, oh, you need to fix your core web vitals because you'll get some SEO boost or whatever. But I honestly believe it's after that, and there's case studies upon case studies, and we publish a lot of them ourselves, about how improving performance leads to upticks in conversion rates or sign-up rates or whatever your business metric is that you're trying to measure. There's one of my friends in the web performance community says often that the SEO side is about getting you some to the page, whereas web performance is about keeping you on that page so you don't get annoyed or frustrated or coming back later and going, hey, that was a pleasant experience to buy from Barry.com or whatever. I'm going to Buyin, and next time I need something, I'm going to go back to that same site because it worked. Whereas, sometimes you sit there and go, I am never buying from this site again. And the only reason you do is if you're forced to, because either your company policy says you have to use that particular vendor, the number of internal sites that are horrible to use because they've got lock-in, or, you're willing to put up with the performance because of other reasons. So budget airlines are one that we all take a horrible hit on for various reasons because they're cheap. So it helps you weigh up that sort of thing. Whereas everything else being equal, I'll go to a nicer site and I'll try and use that. So yeah, absolutely, there's business benefits, and we just need to get a little bit better about selling that. But in the meantime, we've got some other people here that are helping us to sell those things.
Yeah, and I've talked about it before, but I have a very specific experience where I spent years at Home Depot trying to show the value of quantified site performance and what it really meant to create better digital experiences using these metrics, just at a sales level. And it was always very difficult for me to get organizational buy-in. No matter what revenue figure I could say confidently was tied to it, or no matter what specific user experience feedback came through, it didn't really matter. It was always this engineering concept that was, our engineers handle that, and they're going to go, no, guys, listen. I'm telling you, this is way bigger than you think it is. And it wasn't until Google said in 2019, I'll never forget it. And it was back when the Core Web Vitals were not cumulative layout shift, but content layout shift, and not FID, but total blocking time. It was the very first iteration of the Core Web Vitals before SEO was being included. I was talking to my internal partners for SEO, and I was saying, guys, this is coming and it's going to be part of this, and we need to get out ahead of it. And I finally, at that moment, was able to get the attention because it elevated the message. It was no longer just about turning an engineering concept into what I call a product concept. It was about turning it into a top-end volume and just saying, hey, this is going to help us drive more SEO, more additional things. So while to me, I even still stand by it that moment in time meant that we were focusing on the wrong reason of value, but it still meant that we were focusing on the value. And we were actually able to help our customers be able to drive towards these metrics. And to me, it was a gift. It was a gift that allowed me to get organizational buy-in into a concept that I knew was super, super valuable, super important. Yet I was frankly struggling to be able to get that priority until SEO became a inclusion.
Yeah, and I think there's Core Web Vitals is built up in a lot of years and years of work before that. So I think there'd been an awful lot of work of various metrics, as you mentioned and talked about, various iterations we looked at. And as I said earlier, they were sometimes the technical nature of it, like when does when does your browser get your first bytes, and when does it get the last bytes, and when does it render the DOM, and when does it, all this sort of stuff that browser engineers love and care about. And my dad doesn't care about it at all. So there was an iteration of the metrics to something more meaningful for the end user. There was a big move from just the loading side. So a lot of our web performance in the past used to be stick it in this tool, load it, it loads fast, great. When you click on it, oh, we don't care about that. When you scroll down, oh, we don't measure that. It's literally just the load, which is a very important part of web performance, but only one part, and it's only 1/3 of the Core Web Vitals. And then there was measurement in the field. So we had lots of tools. Lighthouse is a very popular one that we look after at Google, where it will tell you one thing, but you've no idea whether that's representative of what your average user is getting. Is that too fast? Is it too slow? Get a lot of people saying, oh, Lighthouse, the mobile emulation is way slower than my users. And it's like, how do you know? Have you measured this? Do you know? But yeah, I will admit it is often slower than most users to really emphasize the issues. But again, without knowing this, you can't see it. Whereas Core Web Vitals measures it in the field, measures actual users, and then sits there and says, hey, this is what you got. This isn't just some tool. This isn't something you can sit there and say, hey, well, it doesn't really count because it's not. No, it is. This is exactly what your users are getting. So yeah, I think a combination of all those things. And yeah, I think teaming up with the search team gave it that extra emphasis and boomf. I do think it's a double-edged sword. I say at work a lot because some people get very, very upset about certain things, or if there's a bug in Chrome, then they're sitting there going, "Oh my God, this is really costing us dollars and money." For you not measuring it properly, there's still always going to be issues where these metrics are not going to be perfect for every website, because we are trying to measure literally every website in the world and say this is a way of measuring it, which is a hell of an achievement when you think about it, because an e-commerce site is completely different than a blog site, which is completely different than the newspaper site with lots of ads and stuff like that, which is completely different than a app that's trying to, a Figma type thing where you can design things, or Photoshop on the web where you can do that. Those are all hugely different things that are all possible on the web now. So how do you come up with some way of measuring all of them fairly and accurately to sit there and say this one's good, this one's bad, this one's not bad, this one's okay but needs to be improved a little bit, and so on. It's quite an achievement, and it's built up on a lot of people's work at the moment. So I just joined at the end of it, so I'll just sit there and take all the glory. But there's years and decades of work that's gone on to reach the point where we are, and we're not done yet. There's still plenty of improvements that we are planning on doing, and that we're going to continue on moving.
Many conversations for me have been spent around showing exactly what you just talked about, which is Google came out with Core Web Vitals as a standard of every website out there. And my example is always to say, hey, a retail website has to deal with inventory checks and a lot of different aspects of stock and logistics, shipping, things that a mom blog does not have to think about. Yet you do have to find one way to measure both in a fair way. So really, when you're thinking about it, especially the SEO implication, you have to recognize that you have to do these things for your customers because they are a necessary part of building a good experience, and your competitors have to do the same things. So if your competitors can do all these same things and have a good INP, that is an achievement that you should seek out as well. If your competitors are also struggling with INP, then maybe you just need to look in your own system and say, okay, well, maybe there's a dependency inside some inventory check that means INP is going to be a little bit lagging in that specific page. That might be okay. And as you're kind of coming through, those aspects are where you need to kind of figure out where does the experience match the SEO ramification or benefit. I know Google likes to talk about that in terms of a SEO benefit. But the SEO aspect of it and how that comes into play is purely competitive from an overall aspect. So I think I've spent a lot of time talking through that specific aspect more than any other when we're talking about prioritizing Core Web Vitals specifically for SEO. And that's kind of to your point, the double-edged sword is figuring out where that balance comes in.
Yeah, and I think it's also like if we compare it to the real world, would you rather visit a store that's walk in, you trip over a horrible carpet and fall flat on your face? There's no signposts anywhere to the different departments. You can't find whatever it is you're looking to buy, and then you go next door and it's air conditioned, it's lovely, the carpet's not got big holes in it, you're walking around, there's signs everywhere, oh, I'll try that, oh no, I'll try this, I'll try that. That's a direct parallel comparison there. And the web is still relatively young compared to actual physical retail shopping. But yeah, can we compare those sorts of things? Can we offer advice and guidelines of, hey, this isn't the nicest experience, this could be better? And yeah, you're bound to get more customers from it. And case study after case study has shown that it's a more pleasant place to be. People will come back, people will buy more, people will interact more, they'll spend longer on your website. You'll get all those business metrics that you want out of it.
You alluded to this, but it sounds like you have been able to document revenue improvements for companies who prioritize improving Core Web Vitals in terms of conversion rates and things like that. Are there case studies like that where you've actually demonstrated revenue implications?
Yeah, so at web.dev/case studies, there's a link at the top, so you can just go to web.dev and click on that. We publish, probably about a case study a month, or at least every couple of months there. From various aspects of the Core Web Vitals. And what we try to do there is not just a company coming on saying, hey, we improved and we're great and we made more money, yay, but a bit more interesting cases. So there's several points to those case studies. One is helps you go to your boss and say, hey, we should look at this. Some of those case studies, we're trying to emphasize a different aspect, often rather than the same case study over and over again. So we might have one company who's done LCP improvements, what they did, how they did it, what you can learn from it and take away to your particular product or area or website. INP, as I say, is the new kid on the block. So getting a lot of interest there. A lot of people are like, what even is this thing? What do I do? How do we do it? So examples of real companies that sit there, what they've measured, how they've realized something, how they've improved it, and how they've been able to see it. And I think measuring performance isn't actually that difficult. You can go in there with a little bit of rum and actually measure your different user journeys. And just sit there and say, once you measure that, that's the difficult part. You can easily segment your traffic and say, okay, people with faster experiences, do they convert more? Oh, they do. I've never heard of anyone that hasn't converted more. So it's usually very easy to segment these and stuff like that. Google Analytics used to have very basic performance metrics, and they don't anymore since we moved to GA4, which is slightly annoying. I'd love for them to get Core Web Vitals in there, but we've been trying there for a little while, but they've got other priorities as well. But yeah, you used to be able to segment there, and it was very easy to see that. Without that, if you've got another run provider tool, and I'm sure you two can mention one that you'd like to mention, but there's plenty of options here, and we also offer free ones that are a little bit more difficult to set up because there's a little bit more manual, which is why a lot of people go for the paid for a solution to do that. And that helps you easily track business metrics with performance, and it's very easy to then sit there and say, hey, surprise, surprise, people who have a more frictionless experience have better are better customers and convert more, buy more, say sign up for newsletters more, whatever metric it is that you're trying to do. It's a well-known and well-proven fact from that, and there's countless studies out there. And Google aren't the only ones. So there's a website, WPO Stats, that does a lot of case studies, and they usually include ours as well. So yeah, there's quite a few that they'll collect from other people. Various companies, engineering teams like to go out there and get the limelight for the hard work. So you'll see them mentioned on Medium and stuff like that. You'll see occasionally random case studies and stuff like that. And I think the other good thing is that Core Web Vitals has become kind of a standard that people use and measure that on that. And that's very much the intention. We don't want it to be a Google thing. We have driven a lot of this, and we're very proud of driving that. But ideally, we want it to be the norm out there. These are the best things that we could think up. If someone else can think up better stuff, then we'll gladly take that on par as well. But we have been leading the charge in this. That does mean sometimes that our tooling is sometimes ahead, or our browsers implement all these metrics and not all the other browsers do. We are trying to standardize these. We're continually asking other browsers what interest they have in putting them. Firefox have just last year put in now support LCP and stuff like that. So we're hopeful that more people and more browsers will take those things on now. And you do see it. Some of the older metrics, a couple of years old, are quite common in browsers. 4 or 5 years old, they're very common in browsers. It's just we're kind of putting more resources in there to try and get that. But yeah, the aim is to have a common way of discussing performance and sit there and say, hey, my LCP is slow. Okay, mine is also slow. I can see this and do that, rather than I'm measuring this very specific metric, very niche metric from my business area or whatever, and do it there. And those are very important, and you should still measure those, but it's nice to have a common vocabulary that we can all talk about as well.
I think one of the things that a lot of people see the obvious value is when you shift LCP from, say, 5 to 3. Like, that's obvious value. But where I've still seen a lot of skepticism is shifting from, say, 3 to 2.8. Like, to many users still, they feel like that's a trivial, undetected number that users are not going to realize, and there's no value tied to such a small shifted window. But what the phenomenon really becomes is subconscious, and there are users with breakpoints that exist in their own mind and their own interpretation of websites that seems irrational, but that breakpoint exists over large population scales. It might not happen to any of us three, but when you have 3 million people, there's going to be a small subset that the breakpoint happens to be at 2.8 seconds. And if it were 2.8 seconds or slower, then they're going to leave. But if the LCP is 2.5 seconds for that user, or even 2.79 seconds, the user's going to stay, because that breakpoint exists at every single cohort of LCP. And it's really a phenomenon of scale. And a lot of brands, from my experience, still find that to be unbelievable.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Like, performance is a scale, and it's not like we've all clicked on a link, and occasionally it'll be a bit slower, and you're like, oh, okay, oh, there it is. And you're often a little bit more willing you're not sure, was it Google that was slow, was it the browser, was it the internet? But once you're on the site and you're clicking around, you damn well know it's the site's fault whenever it's being slow, and you're much more willing to blame that. But yeah, you're right. It's not like at 2.5 seconds, everyone leaves. It's a sliding scale, and the slower it gets, the more people leave. And yeah, it might not be noticeable exactly. You're not going to see a sharp drop off at any point. It's just going to be less and less people and more do it. So we set the Core Web Vital limit, so it's 4 seconds and 2.5 seconds for LCP. Above 4 poor, better than 2.5 is good, and in between is okay. But those are kind of rough guidelines. But it really is, even from 2.5 seconds, you can still see improvements. You get less and less, obviously, as you go on there, as you go further down that. I think the other thing, an area that I've been working on, just to take a slight detour, is moving from that 2.5 seconds to 0 seconds. So there's new technologies to pre-render pages. Speculation rules is something that I've been talking about a lot, that really allows you to click on it and it's just kind of instant. And you get a total different experience then, because it is app-like, is what people like to say a lot. When you're just sitting there and you forget that you're on the website and you're clicking around and you're doing that. And you can therefore put more animations in. You can put view transitions is another thing where funky crossfades and things zooming in and out, which again we're quite used to in mobile apps or even desktop apps, but haven't really been available on the web, but are now. So not only is it every little millisecond costing you some sort of thing, there's also new suddenly experiences that are available once you get past a certain thing. Once you solve your performance issues, you can actually start saying, hey, are we okay to slow this down a little by adding this funky animation or this sort of thing, just to improve the experience that way.
I'm glad you brought up the speculation API, because I really wanted to talk about it. One of the, there's been pre-rendering methods in the past, but one of the problems that has kind of been thrown around is that it impacts interactivity. I guess when you have a Core Web Vital meant to represent interactivity in IMP, yet you want to prioritize loading in LCP using the speculation API, what's the flair of the speculation API that's making sure to prevent an IMP problem? I guess is kind of where my initial thought goes every time I've kind of gone down this path with anything you've presented on with it.
So there's a couple of things, and they're a little contradictory in nature. We'll start with the good, and then I'll warn you some of the things to be aware of. For a start, when you load a website, that is the busiest time typically for a website. Think about it coming onto a highway for you Americans. Everyone coming on there, that's the riskiest time. Once you're on that highway and you're driving straight and you're changing lanes and there's lots of traffic and stuff like that, you're flicking around different pages. You've got a lot of the assets loaded. The logos loaded, the JavaScript's loaded, and some of the common CSS loaded. Yeah, you're still, as you navigate around, different things coming in, but you've got a lot of the work done. At the beginning, you've got nothing, and that's the great thing, and also the worst thing about the web is there's no barrier to entry. You don't need to go and download an app and wait 10 minutes and go make a cup of tea and then come back and do it. You can just click on and do that. But that means you're starting with a blank page. It has to load everything. And that's all your content. So all your fancy images, your videos and stuff like that, your interactivity, so all your JavaScript and all the hidden things that you can't see that are needed to make your website work. So analytics tracking for performance is a big thing that I care about. Business users often care more about other types of tracking for ads or adverts or some of the the background things that help monetize websites. They all have a cost, and that cost is primarily borne at the beginning. So if you can get over and past that, then quite often websites are actually quite pleasant. But at the beginning, they're probably the most unpleasant things that you're going to get there. Maybe there's a spinner and absolutely nothing showing. Maybe it's a white web page for ages. Maybe it looks like it's loaded, but nothing's happening when you click on it. Maybe, it's loaded, you start reading it, and then as I say, that ad clicks in and just really pushes everything down, is quite annoying, and stuff like that. So by speculating and pre-rendering a page in the background, and there's lots of different definitions of pre-render, so we'll cover that in a second. you can hopefully do that for the next page ahead of the game. And even if you can't fully do it, at least getting half of it done might mean the users only wait half as much time for that to be done. And by pre-rendering, as I say, that the way I explain it is it's kind of like right-clicking and opening in another tab. And again, I'm sure we've all done that. Oh, I might read that article in a minute. And you click there, and it's already loaded. You didn't have to wait any time. So it's kind of like the browser doing that automatically. So the benefits are in the load. The benefits are also in everything should be interactive at that point. The COS should be less because things are not loading and shifting things around and things like that. The thing to be aware of, though, is nothing comes free in this world. So if you speculate too many times, your device, whatever be that, a computer, a laptop, a phone, only has so much capabilities. So I'm hoping this recording locally. It's only your device only has so many capabilities. So if you push that too much and say, I want to open 100 tabs and all speculate them all at once, then that's also going to take cost. Also, your network only has so much capability. So if you're downloading all this stuff for future navigations that you may or may not go to, then your current navigation may suffer if you start clicking around on the current page. So there is always a balance between measuring these. On the flip side, there's limited resources to your devices, to your network. So in the same way that if you load 100 tabs in your browser and things start to crawl, if you're sitting there speculating multiple pages at once on the hope that the user goes there, which they may not even visit some of those, then you could be impacting the current page. So you need to use with great power comes great responsibility and do that. But there is, to bring it back to the Core Web Vitals a little bit, there is clear benefits to the Core Web Vitals, particularly in LCP, but also to COS and also into the interactivities, and that you're getting past that initial car crash, I called it earlier, of the first page load when everything's trying to do stuff at once.
Barry, you've alluded to checking Core Web Vitals against your competitors. And I know that a lot of our clients, that's a big thing. That's a thing that Nick works a lot with them. How important is it that you benchmark your Core Web Vitals against your competitors? I'm
in two minds of this. On one side, if you're too busy looking over your fence at your neighbours, you're not tending your own garden. So concentrate on your own stuff, absolutely. Saying that, it's a very powerful tool to get buy-in from management and stuff like that. My previous job before I joined Google, we had one of those film strips which shows a page loading, and we had ourselves, our competitors, the next competitor, and all that. And we could sit there, and whenever they started to load a little bit faster, it was a very powerful visual for management to see. They were like, hey, why we used to be the fastest, what's going on here? I wanted to do that performance sprint and you didn't okay, Barry, you can do it. So it's a good sales technique to sit there and go that. And it is also like, there's good reason behind it. You sit there and look at it. If it's, you're all in the same ballpark, it's not going to, again, we talked about it earlier, it's not going to maybe have a huge noticeable difference, but there definitely will be smaller subconscious psychological differences there. But whenever there is a huge ballpark difference, they're taking 2 seconds to load, you're taking 10 seconds, and you can see those with the publicly available Crux data, then you really are losing business and to this, because people will go there and see that and try the competitor and they won't come back. So I think, yes, don't over-focus on it, but definitely keep an eye on it and say use it to your advantage to make that convincing argument as to why you should focus on it. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there's certain things where people are bought in. My health insurance provider that Google kindly pays for has a terrible experience, and I always get annoyed every time I log in there and do that. But I have no choice over this. I will speak to people ops and HR and complain if that ever comes up to tender, and say, can we go make this a priority for them, because it annoys me. But in general, you kind of bought into those things doing that. But for so much of the web, you've not, like, it's not even like you have to walk next door, as I talked about earlier. You literally just click on another link, or when you're searching, skip over them and go to the next one and say, oh yeah, they were horrible. They were really slow last time. Let's try this other one. So I think it's great to being able to go in there and seeing, oh, hey, we need to pull up our socks here and do something a bit more because they're beating us at this performance game here. At the same time, and this, yeah, at the same time, I will say, like, and this may come across controversial from me and my role, is performance is important, but it's not the most important. It's not. Sorry, it's not the only important thing. The fastest website will be a plain text website, but it won't be very engaging. So the fun and the challenge is trying and meet those different experiences and try and give a fast performant experience, but also a pleasant one.
So gamification of web performance is what the what it does when you watch your competitors, because it gives you the impetus to make the change.
Yeah, and I think there's a huge history of that as well. The Lighthouse scores were the original ones, and they get a little bit of a drubbing now occasionally because people don't like them or say they don't measure and stuff like that. Because we have something better now. We have the Core Web Vitals that we can measure that. But Lighthouse was a huge thing, and those little green circles and getting up to 100 was mostly because we hadn't done a good job of selling it. Was developers pushing themselves to do that rather than management. Whereas I think with Core Web Vitals now we get the rest and the management and the SEO and the marketing teams all involved and do that. But yeah, gamification is huge and can make it fun as well to actually do that.
I just have to thank you for sunsetting time to interactive, though. That was such a hard metric to explain to people when you really start getting, like, I get the intent. The intent was great, but man, was that such a hard metric to explain.
Yeah, and I don't think, to be perfectly honest, it did fully what we hoped it would. I think in theory it was a good idea. I think in practice there was a lot of education, and there's education in Core Web Vitals as well. All day I'm hearing people saying, "Hey, why is this not measuring it?" There's never going to be a perfect solution, but I think TTI had so many educations and in so many cases it said it was bad and it was actually good. That I'm quite glad that it's gone. Not only was it difficult to explain, but it also was difficult to defend in a lot of cases. Whereas I think for the Core Web Vitals, there's definitely cases where it gets it wrong and certain sites that don't measure this and that things, and I have to sit there and defend it and do that. But it's easy whenever most of the time it's getting it right. And just like, yep, that's a bug, we need to fix it, we'll do it. Whereas with TTI, it was like, yeah, it was a much worse rate go there. But again, and it goes back to, we used to concentrate primarily on load. So time to interactive. At that point, once it's interactive, who cares? Whereas what IMP tries to say is all the time, whether it's before it's interactive or during it's interactive, right up until you leave the page, all of that's important, not just that load time. So there's been an awful lot of metrics that come and gone, and years from now, I'm sure we'll be talking about those original Core Web Vitals, LCP, CLS, and FID, and how they're gone to the bin and been replaced with something better. But I think they're pretty good for what we are now. I think FID was probably always the weakest one, and I'm glad we've replaced that now with IMP. There's always things that we can do to improve, given enough time and emphasis. But I think we're in a good place now, and we certainly don't have any plans to introduce. There's no new IMP type thing coming next year. If any of your listeners are worried about that, there's a couple of improvements, or continual improvements that we're working on them. And we want a better way of measuring SPAs is another big change coming. But in general, we're pretty happy with what the Core Web Vitals where they are now and what they've done. We've still a lot of way to get IMP to land properly and get people's understanding and get improvements across the ecosystem. But it's certainly going great, better than most of us expected since we launched it.
Well, people will definitely appreciate that. You speak at a lot of events, talk to a lot of people in the industry. What do you see as the most common misconceptions or confusion around Core Web Vitals? What do people get wrong about it?
I think so. One of the big ones I kind of alluded to earlier was that Lighthouse score. People measure that and think that's Core Web Vitals, or the difference between lab and field, and saying, "Hey, I measured it in this tool and it gave me that," and it's like, okay, but are you measuring it in the field? Another cause of concern, again, I touched on earlier, was cross-browser support. So we'd love to get that a bit better. The way I see that argument is, to me, there's two sides of it. One is Chrome typically looks at so Core Web Vitals certainly in Crux is only measured from Chrome users, and only a subset of those users that are logged in and agree to provide that anonymized data. Chrome users, though, typically span a wider part of the market. There are some very cheap and cheerful Android phones, and there's some very expensive ones, and we kind of cover the whole thing. Other competitors, who I won't name to keep legal happy, kind of target the kind of more premium end of the market. So I think if the situation was reversed and we were looking at the premium end of the market and that's all we measured, I'd be much more concerned. So maybe we have a slight bias towards less of the premium because we don't get that data. That's okay for me. I think we're slightly biased there. It's much better than being biased in the other direction. And then the other thing is improving your Core Web Vitals for Chrome or Chromium-based browsers that can measure these quite often does improve it for everyone else. Yes, there's certain APIs and speculation rules that we talked about earlier that may be Chrome specific, but quite often a colleague at work said Chrome first for some of these APIs, because the hope is that eventually they will filter through to all the other browsers and stuff like that. So you're kind of ahead of the game. But a lot of the web performance optimization techniques don't depend on the latest APIs, and they're just either common sense things that we've been preaching about for a while, and improving them will improve it across the board there. So yeah, the cross-browser story, I'd love it to be better, but I don't think it's the worst thing in the world for those two reasons. Then the business buy-in, or getting the buy-in, because a lot of the developers yet say, yeah, I'm embarrassed how slow our website is, but I've got to add these new features or these other things. And I've had an awful lot of people come up and saying, oh yeah, thank you for the Core Web Vitals. Well, it wasn't me, but I'll take that pleasure. Saying they've finally got the buy-in from that. So that's still another challenge. I think it's got easier since Core Web Vitals come along. We do need to worry that we don't get fatigued or make too many changes and people are like, another metric, or they've made it too hard or thing. And I think we try and set those limits to tough but achievable limits so that people don't go, I'm never going to get there, forget it, I'm not going to look there. Everyone can get to these things or with a bit of effort and so on. The other thing is complexity. And I mentioned at the beginning that we try to make these metrics sort of usable, understandable, things that my dad could understand. And I think at a high level there are that, but there's quite often the developer side is weird things that they've got to figure out, or they've got to learn about all this performance from scratch. And I think we're doing a great job in web.dev trying to disseminate information there and explain to people and listen. So a big part of my job is going out there listening and saying, hey, what could be improved in our documentation or tooling to make this easier? Or third-party tooling, when we speak to a lot of run providers and other people to do that, to try and do that. But that's going to be a continual thing of educating and improvement and so on. And then, the other thing is that developers are just busy. There's an awful lot going on, and performance, again, is just one part of it. So to try and keep up to date with these things and latest APIs and changes and things that they can improve, and some of them, might only improve at milliseconds, but those add up and so on. There's much effort they put into those, and or do they ignore it for a couple of sprints or months or years and then suddenly have to do a huge amount of work to try and once a year to try and bring it up. Those are some of the challenges I hear from developers. I mean, I'm interested to hear what you've heard or through this podcast or other things.
Yeah, I don't know, Nick, if there's any. I know the one thing that you said earlier that we have heard consistently is what people appreciate about Core Web Vitals. It's finally a standard for measuring user experience, that there's not ever been a standard before. And that's what makes it hard to get the kind of support they need and buy-in at a senior level. This is giving them that ability because it becomes a standard that everybody can follow.
And focusing in on saying user experience, not saying simply page load or engineering concepts or something that is, to most people mystified and technical, because these are not mystified and technical, because you're right. Your dad can focus on that and your dad can understand it. That's really important. And that was a really important aspect, Barry, because if you missed that, then you would still just be, oh, my engineers handle that. And being able to win in this world where it's everybody in it together for user experience, the frictionless experience, that's when this went from just another metric to something bigger.
Yeah, and I think that's another thing that we're seeing more and more of, because there used to be these barriers up of dev look after that, dev hate marketing who are putting all these tags on the page and never ask them stuff like that. Whereas I think the best teams are the ones that work together. And I tell people countlessly, go and make friends with your marketers, go and speak to them, get access to your tag managers, and actually have a look at what's in there, because people are realizing that there's only so much development can do here. So if you want a 20 megabyte video because you think it looks fancy on your homepage, it's going to be slow to load. So you need to sit down and have honest conversations and say, is this the best thing to have above the fold on our homepage as the first thing that people see? Yes, it's a fancy video. Yes, you spent a lot of money making it, I'm sure, but maybe it should load slowly and only display whenever it's there. Maybe it should be further down so it gets a bigger chance to load. There's cost to some of these business decisions that developer can only do so much about to counteract. How many ads you have on the page, how many tracking marketing pixels you have on the page, all adds up. The fact that you don't marketing maybe doesn't prioritize removing tags. They love to add them, they never like to remove them, and you spend the time looking at it and you suddenly see your core web vital scores go up, then that's something, again, developers have little control over it. So it is a big thing, and developers also have little control over resourcing and budgeting of their time and so on. So again, having a wider conversation with management, with the people, with other priorities, and saying, hey, do you want this feature or do you want this performance sprint to try and improve that and improve this user experience? So all those things are powerful things that I think are helping developers as well out there.
And I think you said it best. You can never forget about the cheap and cheerful devices. What a great phrase that was.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing that we've always said in the as web performance community is buy the cheapest device and go out there and struggle it. I think it was Facebook used to have slow Wi-Fi Tuesdays or something like that, where they slowed everything down to make people realize what their users are sometimes going through, because you get a lot of empathy there whenever you suddenly realize that, actually, they don't all have the latest and greatest devices and fast internet and so on.
I'd go on a rant if I did it too far, but I talk about developer bias and product bias often, which is exactly this concept. It's basically to say you have a perfect environment and you're looking at your stuff with that perfect environment. Your customers do not have that. Just simply they do not.
And again, going back, I think, to me, the Chrome user experience report and the Core Web Vitals through that has democratized field data and got people a lot more interested in it. It used to be a very niche thing where it was a very expensive product, or only high-end people did it, whereas we sit there and it's limited, I'll agree, and that's why Run products are doing a great job beyond that, but it gets people interested in there and gets people to actually see, hey, I actually now see how slow it is, or you can actually, in certain using certain tools and some of the Crux data, you can sit there and say, hey, my people in Ireland are slow, but my people in the UK are fine. Why? What's going on? Or my people in France are fine, but my people in Canada, and I didn't even realize I have that many users, but I'm a French site and there's French speakers in Canada are having a terrible time. What can we do about improving that and so on? Or do we not care about those people, or should we? So I think, yeah, it's a powerful tool that we've allowed people to start realizing what the real users are actually experiencing there.
Well, this has been such a great conversation. This might be our longest episode yet on the podcast. And I feel like we could do a whole nother episode on it because there's like 100 topics I didn't even get to. So this has been phenomenal, Barry. Where can listeners connect with you? Where's the best way to find you?
So I'm active in most social medias. I'm still hanging on to Twitter with my last dying fingernails. So that's probably where I'm most. There's a web performance Slack that I hang around there. If you need an invite to that, feel free to ping me. I'm also available on Mastodon, LinkedIn. I say my job is to get out there, so I'm usually pretty easy to find. Or if you see me at any of the conferences, I'm pretty chatty. So come up and have a chat. Or if you've got any questions, I get paid to talk to you, so do reach out and let me know, and I'll see what I can do to help. I'd love to hear this feedback and understand what people are struggling with out there to see how we can improve it.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you for joining us. Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Frictionless Experience. Remember to follow us on your favorite podcast player app so you can automatically receive notifications when we upload new episodes. And be sure to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Let us know what you think, or Spotify, and what topics you'd like us to cover, because we're happy to cover anything. And of course, you can find and connect with me and Nick on LinkedIn. I'm at Chuck Moxley, and Nick is
at In Palladino.
And I'm at Tune the Web on most things, including LinkedIn, Twitter, and Mastodon.
Awesome. We'll put links in the show notes for you as well.
Perfect. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Well, thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Frictionless Experience. We've had an incredible conversation with Barry Pollard from Google about Core Web Vitals and their impact on user experience. Let's recap some key takeaways. Number one, Core Web Vitals are more than just technical metrics. They represent real user experiences that everyone in your organization should care about, from the developers to the marketers and even the executives. Use these metrics to align your teams around improving user experience.
Absolutely, Chuck. And let's not forget, benchmarking your Core Web Vitals against competitors can be a powerful tool for getting buy-in from management. Use this data to make a compelling case for investing in performance improvements.
That's a great point, Nick. Another important takeaway is don't underestimate the impact of small performance improvements. Even shaving off a fraction of a second can make a difference at scale. Remember, every millisecond counts when it comes to user experience and maximizing conversions.
And finally, consider the diversity of devices and network conditions your users might have. Test your site on lower-end devices and slower networks to gain empathy for your users and identify areas of improvement. Your bias can create a bad customer experience for your customers.
All excellent points that our listeners can act on. Remember, creating a frictionless experience is an ongoing process, and Core Web Vitals provide a standardized way to measure and improve that experience.
That's right, Chuck. We hope you found this episode valuable. Don't forget to subscribe to the Frictionless Experience and leave us a review. We'll see you in the next episode.